At 1 a.m. on a November night in 2016, a family in Loxahatchee, Florida, awoke to a real-life nightmare. A horrific scene. Screams to call 911, and a young man dying in his bedroom. From the house emerged 3 survivors, a distraught mother, her boyfriend, and the best friend. But it was a 4th person, they claimed, who had made their way inside the locked house in the middle of the night, committed the murder, and escaped. Welcome to the Crime Decoder, where we unravel the layers of real-life mysteries that keep you up at night. Today we're diving into a case that shook the quiet community of Loxahatchee, Florida, a story of love gone wrong, conflicting narratives, and a truth that's as unsettling as it is undeniable. The murder of James Berry is a case filled with emotional turmoil, disputed evidence, and a courtroom battle that left a family broken and a community searching for answers. In the early hours of November 16, 2016, the stillness of Glasgow Drive in Loxahatchee, a serene suburban enclave in Palm Beach County, Florida, was shattered by a desperate 911 call. The caller was 56-year-old Nicola Berry, her voice trembling with panic. She had woken to a scene of chaos in her home. Her 21-year-old son, James Berry, was lying in his bedroom, critically injured. When Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the modest single-story house, they found 3 adults alongside James. Nicola, her live-in boyfriend of several years, Guy Hand, a butcher by trade, and James' best friend, Jeff Jarspakowski, who had stayed over after a night of playing video games. Inside James' bedroom, the scene was heart-wrenching. First responders found James on his bed, his body riddled with stab wounds. Guy was frantically performing CPR, his hands and arms stained with blood from his efforts. Paramedics took over, moving James to the floor to continue life-saving measures, but their attempts were in vain. James had suffered multiple stab wounds, including several fatal ones to his chest, severing vital arteries. At just 21 years old, he was pronounced dead at the scene, leaving those around him in shock and disbelief. Nicola, Guy, and Jeff were escorted to the roadside outside the home, where a concerned neighbor approached to offer comfort. Both Guy and Jeff bore visible signs of the tragedy, blood on their hands, arms, and clothing, a testament to their desperate attempts to save James before emergency services arrived. As they stood under the dim glow of streetlights, the group grappled with the horror of what had just unfolded, their minds racing to make sense of the unthinkable. As deputies secured the scene, investigators began piecing together the evidence. On the kitchen counter, they found a chilling sight: a carving knife with a white handle and a 10-inch curved blade smeared with blood. A trail of blood led from the kitchen, through the hallway, and into James' bedroom, suggesting the attack may have begun in the kitchen and ended where James was found. The knife was later confirmed as the murder weapon, its blade bearing the unmistakable marks of a violent struggle. Outside, near the home's back door, which was found ajar despite Guy's nightly routine of locking all entrances, investigators discovered a cell phone in a pink case on a patio table. Nearby were small drops of a blood-like substance, later confirmed to be James' blood. The phone belonged to Melanie M., James' 19-year-old girlfriend, immediately raising suspicions. How had her phone ended up there, and why was the back door open in a house where all entry points were reportedly secured? As detectives processed the scene, the 3 adults outside began speculating about what had happened. Despite their shock, they quickly pointed to Melanie as the likely perpetrator. Jeff explained that James had been texting with Melanie earlier that evening, and their conversation had turned heated. James was trying to end their relationship, a decision that had sparked an argument. Around 8 o'clock or 8:30 p.m., Melanie had shown up uninvited at the house, but James told her to leave. Jeff recalled James sending her a text that read, "Go away, or we're done. This is disrespectful." The group believed she had returned later that night, somehow gaining entry to the locked home. Guy was adamant that he had locked all doors: the front door, a side door to the patio, and the back door before going to bed. The open back door puzzled him. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no pried windows, no evidence of tampering. How could Melanie have gotten inside? Guy speculated she might have stolen a key or entered through the garage, but no evidence supported these theories. The knife's origin added another layer of intrigue. As a butcher, Guy owned a collection of large blades stored in a specific kitchen drawer next to the stove. The murder weapon was one of his, used just hours earlier to carve a roast for the family's dinner. Its presence in the crime scene suggested the killer was familiar with the home's layout. To understand the events of that night, we need to go back to the relationship between James Barry and Melanie M. The two were high school sweethearts who met through mutual friends in their school's gaming circle. Got both avid gamers. They bonded over late-night sessions of strategy games, their shared passion laying the foundation for a fast-moving romance. James, described as kind-hearted and loyal, was a quiet young man with a love for animals and a bright future ahead. Melanie, shy and reserved, was welcomed into the Barry family with open arms. She often spent time at their Loxahatchee home baking desserts and cooking special meals for James, Nicola, and Guy. After James' parents divorced when he was young, he lived with Nicola and later Guy, and Melanie became a regular presence during holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. When James enrolled at Palm Beach College to pursue his studies, Melanie, who was younger, followed his lead. She earned her GED to join the same program, a move that highlighted her devotion to him. But by 2016, after 2 years together, their relationship had become a volatile cycle of breakups and reconciliations. Friends and family noted that the couple was inseparable at their best, but plagued by jealousy and arguments at their worst. Melanie's insecurities, particularly about one of James's ex-girlfriends, fueled tension. Text messages exchanged on the night of the murder revealed the depth of their troubles. James, frustrated, wrote to Melanie via a gaming app. "It might be better for us to split and focus on ourselves, rather than worrying about each other constantly. We're not happy." He addressed her concerns about his ex, saying, "I'm not going back to her, don't worry. But we need to accept we're not working." Melanie pushed back, writing, "I thought you were happy with me before these last few days." James responded, "I express my feelings better in writing than in person. I'm not happy anymore. Thanks for leaving me through a league chat." The messages carried a sense of finality, with James determined to end the relationship. Melanie, however, seemed unwilling to let go. Around midnight, Melanie's Toyota Corolla was spotted parked outside James' home, a detail that would become pivotal in the investigation. As detectives worked the crime scene, they sought out Melanie, who had vanished from Loxahatchee. Her parents, contacted by police, were stunned, insisting their daughter couldn't be involved in such a crime. They were also alarmed they had no idea where she was. Using traffic camera footage, investigators traced Melanie's movements, discovering she had driven nearly 1,000 miles through the night to Maryland, where she had an uncle and cousins. Maryland police were dispatched to her uncle's address, where they located her car. Approaching under the guise of a welfare check, officers told Melanie's relatives they were concerned about her emotional well-being, citing family concerns. Melanie emerged from the house, appearing calm but admitting she was scared. When pressed about why, she offered little, saying, "I don't know." Detective Oliver from Palm Beach County traveled to Maryland to interview Melanie. In a recorded conversation at her uncle's home with 2 cousins present, he emphasized that she wasn't under arrest, only a person of interest. He didn't read her Miranda rights, framing the discussion as informal to encourage her to talk. With the family dog whimpering in the background, Melanie admitted to driving to James' house that night to discuss their breakup. She claimed James had invited her to talk in person, but under questioning, she revealed a darker truth. She admitted to grabbing a knife from the kitchen drawer, knowing exactly where Guy kept his blades, and stabbing James in a moment of emotional turmoil. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said repeatedly, insisting she thought he'd survive. She admitted to tossing the knife in the bedroom, fleeing the house, and driving to Maryland, stopping at a Walmart to buy a new phone, and leaving her old one on the patio table. Melanie's flight to Maryland, her purchase of a new phone, and her decision to abandon her old one raised red flags. Why run if she believed James would be okay? Why leave her phone behind? These questions would loom large in the case. Melanie was extradited to Florida, where she was charged with manslaughter and second-degree murder. She pleaded not guilty and was held without bond awaiting trial. Her attorney, Bruce Lear, filed a motion to suppress her Maryland confession, arguing that Detective Oliver had coerced her by suggesting the crime was a spontaneous act of passion driven by a broken heart. Lear claimed the detective's leading questions shaped her statement, violating her constitutional rights. The state countered that Melanie wasn't under arrest, had been told multiple times she was free to leave, and had willingly spoken. At the end of the interview, Detective Oliver asked if she felt comfortable talking, to which she responded positively. The motion to suppress was denied, allowing the confession to be used at trial. In the fall of 2018, Melanie's trial began in Palm Beach County, drawing significant local attention. The prosecution built their case around Melanie's confession. Her motive, heartbreak and anger over the breakup, and her actions after the crime. They painted a picture of a young woman consumed by rejection, who drove to James' house, took a knife she knew well, and stabbed him in a fit of rage. Her flight to Maryland and purchase of a new phone were presented as evidence of consciousness of guilt. The state also highlighted the text messages, which showed James' clear intent to end the relationship and Melanie's refusal to accept it. The defense, however, came out with a bold and controversial theory. Guy Hand, Nicola's boyfriend, was the real killer. They argued that the investigation had been flawed from the start, with police focusing on Melanie based on the three adults' immediate accusations. The defense pointed out that the house was locked, with no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer was already inside. Guy, a butcher familiar with knives, had access to the murder weapon and knew its exact location. They questioned his actions that night. He admitted to taking half a Valium at 9:30 p.m. to help him sleep, which could have altered his behavior. He moved the knife from the bedroom to the kitchen, potentially tampering with evidence. And he partially washed his left hand before police photographed him, using water handed to him by an officer. Most critically, they challenged his decision to perform CPR on James while he was on a soft bed, rather than a hard surface, despite claiming to have received CPR training 10 to 15 times over his career. The defense also pointed to physical evidence involving Melanie. Blood was found on the cuff of her shirt and on the gear shift of her Toyota Corolla, which was parked outside the house that night. They argued this proved she was present, but not necessarily the killer. Instead, they claimed Melanie witnessed Guy attack James and fled in fear, traumatized by what she saw. They suggested Guy staged the scene, placing Melanie's phone on the patio table to frame her and moving the knife to obscure his own involvement. Nicola and Jeff's testimonies supported Guy. Nicola, who wore earplugs to bed due to her sensitivity to noise, confirmed a Guy was beside her when Jeff's screams woke them. She saw Guy rush to James' room and later witnessed him grab the knife and place it on the kitchen counter without wiping it down. Jeff testified that he heard James calling out, warning him to run, and saw Guy emerge from his bedroom, looking as if he had just woken up, with no blood on him initially. Both denied any involvement by Guy in the attack. The prosecution emphasized Melanie's confession, where she admitted to taking the knife and stabbing James. They argued her emotional pain, described by Melanie as feeling like her heart would stop, drove her to stop James' heart instead. The state also noted that James' screams alerted Jeff, who then woke the household, suggesting Melanie fled as the chaos unfolded. After 10 hours of deliberation, the 6-person jury deadlocked. 4 jurors voted for second-degree murder, which requires intent to kill or a depraved mind, while 2 favored manslaughter, indicating recklessness or negligence. Unable to reach a unanimous verdict, the judge declared a mistrial, and a new trial was scheduled. In January 2019, Melanie faced a retrial, with both sides doubling down on their arguments. The defense continued to accuse Guy, introducing new evidence. The murder weapon's blade was bent, suggesting a forceful attack more likely committed by a stronger individual, like Guy, rather than the 90-pound Melanie. They argued that Melanie's confession was unreliable, shaped by Detective Oliver's leading questions, and that her failure to name Guy as the killer was due to fear and trauma. They reiterated that her presence in the house didn't prove guilt, and her flight to Maryland was a panicked response to witnessing a brutal murder. The prosecution countered with the strength of Melanie's confession. She provided specific details, such as knowing the knife's location and admitting to stabbing James. When asked how many times she stabbed him, she replied, "It's not like I was counting," which the state argued showed a depraved mind consistent with second-degree murder. They questioned why, if Melanie witnessed Guy's attack, she never mentioned it during her interview, instead offering details of her own actions. The prosecution also highlighted her calculated behavior after the crime, fleeing across state lines, buying a new phone, and abandoning her old one to avoid being tracked. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder with a weapon. At the sentencing hearing, a clinical and forensic psychologist testified that Melanie had self-reported long-term physical and sexual abuse by her mother, corroborated by a cousin but lacking official documentation from social services or police. The prosecution challenged the claim's credibility, noting its late introduction and lack of corroboration. Judge Glenn Kelly considered a life sentence, but weighed mitigating factors. Melanie was 19 at the time of the crime, had no prior criminal history, and the charge was second-degree murder, not first-degree. He sentenced her to 50 years in prison, meaning she'll be in her 70s when eligible for release. The trial's outcome brought some closure to James' family, but the pain of his loss was immeasurable. Nicola, speaking through tears, described James as a gentle soul with a heart full of love. He was loyal, loved his family, his friends, and animals, she said. Had so much potential: college, a career, maybe a family of his own one day. All of that was taken away. The 50-year sentence ensured Melanie would spend decades behind bars, but for Nicola, it couldn't replace her son. "Every day we miss him," she said. "There's not a moment we don't think about what he could have been." James' sister Alexandra echoed her mother's grief, recalling his infectious smile and unwavering kindness. The family's heartbreak was palpable, a reminder of the ripple effects of such a senseless act. The murder of James Barry is a tragic tale of love turned deadly, a relationship that spiraled into violence with devastating consequences. The evidence pointed to Melanie's guilt, her confession, her presence at the scene, her flight to Maryland, but the defense's accusations against Guy, hand-raised questions that linger for some. Was Guy's handling of the knife and his questionable CPR technique merely the actions of a traumatized man in shock, or something more sinister? Why did Melanie confess so readily if she was only a witness? And how did she enter a locked house without leaving a trace? This case reminds us how quickly passion can turn to tragedy, and how the truth can sometimes feel just out of reach. What do you think happened that night in Loxahatchee? Was Melanie the heartbroken girlfriend driven to murder, or was she a scapegoat in a more complex story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take. Thanks for joining us on the Crime Decoder. If this case gripped you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into true crime mysteries.